So after a long wait, this week we finally saw the veil lifted on the PlayStation 5 and we got to see the console and more importantly some of the next generation games. And I thought overall it was a really good show. I think they accomplished exactly what they needed to. They got everybody talking about the PlayStation 5 and they got a lot of people excited. They showed off some impressive titles and then left some for later showings. And the way they revealed the actual hardware I thought was pretty much perfect. So I plan on doing another video talking about how I think Xbox should learn from this and should incorporate some of the things that were done in this show into their July showing, but also how they could improve upon it, because there were definitely some things that did fall short, especially deciding to reveal your next generation graphics in a low quality stream. And some people walked away thinking, you know, there wasn't really anything there that looked much different than what I'm playing right now. And so it was really hard to appreciate unless you watched some high quality videos that were uploaded after the show. But that's for a different day. In this video, I want to talk about a headline that's getting a lot of attention where Digital Foundry took a deep dive into the videos that were uploaded later and walked away saying that the vast majority of the PlayStation 5 games shown were running in 30 frames per second. And you all know that if you followed me for a while, this is a topic that I'm pretty passionate about. And I'm a big believer in frames per second and performance over resolution and graphics. And I think it's pathetic to be talking about buying a brand new next generation console in 2020, bragging about power, bragging about advancements, bragging about speed, and then you're still gonna say, oh, the game is still locked to 30 frames per second. So this headline has been everywhere, a lot of people sharing it, a lot of people talking about it, and it definitely should be discussed. But I want to make one thing clear that a lot of people aren't talking about. Digital Foundry can only evaluate the trailer that was released at this point. And they don't have access to the games, they haven't played them, and during a reveal it makes sense that you're going to try to showcase your game in the best light possible. So you're gonna try to show the best visuals and graphics because people can just see they're not actually playing the game. So just because a game is running at 4K 30 frames per second, it doesn't mean that there aren't other settings and that it can't run 1440 60 or 1080 60, whatever. So before we all start grabbing our pitchforks and start attacking Sony or Microsoft for showing off 30 frames per second games, I think it's important to hold off, to have all the information and know other possible settings before we start passing judgment and before we start marching. Having said that, if it does turn out to be the case that some games are locking you down to 30 frames per second with no options, that is a monumental fail. 30 frames per second is not next generation. 30 frames per second is what you've had every generation. And there is no excuse to not give players options. And hear me out, that's all I'm asking for is options. Everybody should have the option. I'm not saying take it away from other people. So if you prefer the cinematic feel of 30, you want to jack up the resolution, you want to have the ray tracing and every other, graphical feature on, that's completely fine. I don't think we should be trying to take anything away from anybody. But what I'm advocating for is having options. Give console players a performance option. Maybe that means lowering the resolution or playing without ray tracing. That's fine. Let the user decide. Now, people are going to say, well, this isn't up to Microsoft or Sony, so we can't blame these companies for what developers decide to do in their games. And I would mostly agree with that statement. However, I would add, plenty of digital storefronts have requirements or expectations that must be met before a developer can sell their product on them. And I would completely support Microsoft or Sony saying, hey, if you're going to develop for our premium hardware, then your game needs to deliver these basic features. I mean, every company does quality control, and I would say performance is a quality control. So they could say that, but on the other hand, Don't give me the whole developers should develop the way they feel is best for their creations BS. Especially when 95% of these same games are gonna run on PC. And they are not gonna be locked to 30 frames on PC. So your whole argument that the developers are developing the game they intended it to be played, are you saying that it's not intended to be played on PC at much higher frames per second? They put it on the system, but they didn't intend for it to be played that way. They intended for it to be played on the gimped version. Is that really your argument? The gimped version is better because that's the way developers wanted it? I mean, that's absolutely laughable. So maybe I'm being naive. Or maybe it's just my hope or desire is overriding my reasoning, but I want to believe that 30 frames per second is not going to be the standard on next generation consoles. But that's why it's so imperative to go ahead and speak out now, to cause a commotion so that developers know what gamers want. And we want options. And look, I don't want to be like a Debbie Downer or anything, because there are some really exciting things in the frames per second department to be excited about. Xbox has been speaking a lot about 60 frames per second and even higher. You've got several devs who have already said that their games are gonna run at 60 frames per second. Demon Souls announced that they're gonna offer a performance mode for people who prefer higher frames per second. The Dirt developer, which I thought was pretty huge, came out and said their game is already running at 120 frames per second on the Xbox Series X, which I think is absolutely fantastic. So it's not all doom and gloom, but people need to make it clear to developers that this is next generation, and next generation isn't 30 frames per second. Both the PS5 and Xbox Series X can easily run games at 60 frames per second, and there's no reason why they shouldn't. That doesn't mean that you can't put in 4K 30 or do whatever again, but do you really want to go spend $500 or whatever the price is for the next generation console and still be locked to last generation's frames per second? I don't. I want options. And if you agree with me, like this video, share it, tell developers that you want to see options. That does it for me, the Red Dragon. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.
Are you listening? Damn. Yeah.